Here we are with my March wrap up. I read so many good books in March. It was such a good reading month. I can't believe it worked out the way that it did. Typically in March, I get into a little bit of a reading slump because I've just done my 28 books in 28 days reading challenge and I tend to burn myself out. March ended up being such a good month right from the start, and I think having a 5-star book at the beginning of the month really spurred me on for the rest of it. So here I am to talk about the books. If you want some quick reading stats, I'll put a couple of things on the screen. I read 10 books in total in March, which amounted to about 3,115 pages, although that's not entirely accurate. I listened to a couple of audiobooks and my average rating was 3.6, and I only bought 4 books in March, which is amazing. Normally by now I will have caved on my book restriction ban sort of thing and bought so many books, but I haven't. I'm doing really, really well. So I think on average I am acquiring 4 books a month, which is 1 a week, which is accidentally what I'm actually kind of low-key aiming for, because I feel like I don't need to buy more than 1 book a week. That's just madness. So yeah, that's going really well so far. I'm so pleased with myself. So let's get on to the books. I'm just going to talk about them in the order that I read them because that's the easiest way. And the first book that I read was a brilliant one, so I'm glad that I get to talk about it first, and that was A History of Burning. This one I read because I picked it up a little while ago, I think kind of on a whim. It sounded quite good because it's a generational story, so let me just tell you what it's about first, then we'll talk about like my thoughts and feelings. This starts off in India following a young 13-year-old boy. Right at the start of the book, he is kind of propositioned, if that's the correct word for it, by a British man. The Indian boy doesn't really speak much English at all. The British man says that he's got a job for him and he should be able to provide for his family using his wages. The boy, whose name is Purbai, I think. I'm not very good with names. He really wants to look after his family. He's got some sisters and a mother as well, and he is meant to be the main provider for them because I don't think his father's around. So he signs the deal and then is whisked off to Africa. It turns out that the British man was going around getting young Indian people or young Indian men to work on the East African Railway. None of the Indian people were really sure of what was going on. They were taken over there under false pretenses. They signed contracts that they really had no way of getting out of. And that's just the first little part of the book. It very quickly moves to the guy's son and then carries on following some of the generations. It kind of follows the family story of how they were in Kenya or Uganda, the sort of issues they had over there and whether some of them could go back to India eventually if they wanted to. It very briefly covers the split when Pakistan became a country, although it doesn't really go into much detail, but it does talk about sort of the British impact on Indian people in Uganda and Kenya and kind of how Indian people were received there or perceived. It's a very, very complicated history. Obviously, the British colonized those 2 countries, the entire area. They ended up burning down villages of the native African people's homes, but they brought in people from a country that they had already colonized instead of giving jobs to the local people because they knew that they could take advantage of the Indian people, take them away from their home country, everything they know, away from their families and isolate them. So they were oppressing 2 people in very different ways, and this ended up kind of making them the native African people and the Indian people who were sort of displaced. They did not get on. The Africans didn't want them in their country because they shouldn't have been there, and that's very true, but it wasn't their choice. Reading about those relationships was so interesting, and how the Indian kids were growing up alongside the African kids and the different dynamics there. It also spoke a little bit about British Indian families as well, who were a bit more well off because they'd gone to, well, Great Britain and had more kind of privileges than the people who were sort of left behind in Uganda or Kenya. And then later on in the novel, we travel to Canada to see how things are different there. And it was such an interesting read and I loved it. If you can't tell by how much I'm waffling on about it and about the history, I really, really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was absolutely incredible. I loved learning about the history of partly India, but mainly Indians who were living in Uganda and Kenya or East Africa, because it's not really a period of history that I've learnt much about or an area that I've learnt much about. And watching this family as they went through the generations was heartbreaking, heartwarming at times, absolutely wonderful. And this is only a debut novel as well, which is wild to me. I've already been talking about it for like 10 minutes. I'm gonna have to cut this down. I have so much to say about it. It's such a beautifully written book, and I think everyone would get so much out of this one if you were to read it. I would actually liken this to Homegoing by Yazi. It's not exactly the same. It's told less in like short stories and more as like a overarching novel, although it feels a little bit like it because you do skip the generations. Anyway, I adore this book. Best book of the year, maybe, so far, I reckon. It was fantastic, and I would reread this in a heartbeat. I then read another 5-star book, which again is wild to me. I don't know how this happened. This was a little bit different to A History of Burning, because that was Mile High by Liz Tomford. I don't know what's happened to me. This is a sports romance book, and I don't like sports romances, but I gave this 5 stars. It's also over 600 pages, like, or nearly, maybe not quite. It's 560 pages, which is horribly long for a romance book, and I loved it. I thought the first 100 pages or so were a bit annoying because I didn't like the male love interest. His name is Xanders, which sounds ridiculous in my accent. It should be Xanders, which sounds a bit better. And it's about him, and he is a ice hockey player, and he's kind of like the bad boy of the team. It's also about a woman called Stevie, who is a flight attendant on his private jet, or like the team's private jet. And yeah, and it's about their romance and stuff. And I don't really know what else there is to it. That's most of it, although it does also tackle difficult family relationships and stuff as well. It was so good, and the main character also works part-time at a dog sanctuary, kennels sort of thing, which was just lovely. If you read this, you'll probably find the main character, Xanders, really freaking annoying at first. He is quite terrible in the beginning, but then you realise a lot of it is just kind of a front, and he has a lot of issues and mummy issues and stuff, which again, I would normally find annoying, but for some reason I didn't in this book. It was just addictive, and I loved it. So I gave this one 5 stars. And then I went straight into reading The Right Move, which is the second book in the series. This one follows Stevie's brother Ryan and Stevie's best friend Indy. Indy moves in with Ryan because she doesn't have anywhere else to live. She caught her boyfriend cheating on her with someone and literally like walked in on them, and it was gross. So she needs somewhere to stay for a while. So she moves in with him because Stevie has moved out in with her boyfriend, and now there's a spare room in Ryan's flat. I didn't love this one as much as I loved Mile High. I know normally it's the other way around for people, so people tend to like Mile High but then love The Right Move, but for me it's the opposite. This one just wasn't as good, and I think that's because I didn't love Ryan as much. He didn't live up to Xanders for me. I actually found him a bit annoying. I really liked Indy though. I really liked her. It's probably worth mentioning this one covers, or Ryan is a basketball player and not an ice hockey player. Not that that really matters to me, but in case you were wondering. Yeah, there's not really much to talk about with this one. Again, this deals with like difficult family relationships and stuff. It's all very interesting. And then I moved on to the third book, which is Caught Up, and I gave that one 3 stars. I gave The Right Move 4 stars, I can't remember if I just said, and I gave Caught Up 3. So that one was much less interesting to me. I think that's because I didn't really care about any of the characters. So it follows a guy called Kai who lives in Ryan from the second book's building. You do get a scene with him in The Right Move. He's introduced like once, and you know that he's a single dad. It wasn't enough. I didn't get to know him enough in the second book to then go into his own one, and we didn't know the woman at all. I can't actually remember her name, which is really bad. That's a real shame because I was really enjoying this series, but I think it's mainly because I really like the characters in it, and the characters in the third book just weren't as intriguing to me. And I will be reading the fourth book, but I'm a bit worried about it because I know who the romance is going to be between, and I don't like either of those characters, so I don't think I'm gonna love it. The first 2 books in the series are absolutely incredible, and I might do a full series review once the fourth book comes out, if that's the last one, just to chat about it a bit more because it was really good. I then read my first book from the Women's Prize long list, and the only book that I've read so far, and that is Ordinary Human Failings, and this one was so boring. I gave it 2 stars, I think. So this basically follows a family who are going through some stuff. It's set in the 90s in London. There's a journalist called Tom, and he is looking into this family because the toddler, or young child of the family, was accused of killing a toddler, which is a really dark subject matter, and I feel like this could have been really good, but it just wasn't. So Tom kind of interviews each of the family members in turn, and you learn a bit about their backstories and what happened to them, what led to them coming to London from Ireland, how their relationships are with each other. And I think it had promise, and again, that sounds a little bit like generational fiction because you are sort of learning about like the grandparents even. That could have been my thing, except it just felt really rushed, and like the author just didn't care about any of the characters. It's only a very short book as well, and that's why I started with this one, because it was tiny, and I don't think the author gave this family enough space to tell their stories and let them breathe. I think it felt like she was just like churning them out. And then I was reading that, I can't remember where I read this, but someone said that she was being pressured by her publisher to release a second book after the success of her first one. And I really feel like she should have been allowed a little bit longer to work on this, because I feel like it could have been 100 pages longer, and we could have gone more into the families, we could have gotten to know the characters a lot better, and it just would have been a better book. So unfortunately, I didn't like this one and gave it 2 stars. I then read The 3-Body Problem as an audiobook, and I didn't like this one either. I gave this one 2 stars. This is a sci-fi book about I don't even know where to start. You've probably heard of it, to be fair. It's set in China. It starts off in, I think, the 60s, around the time of the revolution. The main character's father or whole family are killed, and then it skips ahead and scientists are dying a lot, and it's all very suspicious. And then the person who's looking into the deaths of the scientists, he starts seeing weird things and getting involved in a game called the Three Body, or just Three Body. I just found this entire thing very, very dry. It's meant to feel like a classic sci-fi book, I think, because from the reviews that I've read, what people are saying is that the West already did this kind of sci-fi and we've kind of moved on a little bit more. China, the author is a Chinese author living in China still. It took a little while to sort of explore the genre in that way, which is why this reads so much like a classic sci-fi. And I agree that it's kind of dry like a classic, but I've also read much better classic sci-fis than this. I really didn't enjoy it, and I do also wonder whether it's because I don't get on with Ken Liu's writing style, and he's the translator for this book. I was considering giving the second book a go, but I didn't like this one enough to continue, and I'll just read synopses and watch the show, to be honest, because it wasn't as mind-blowing as everyone was saying, unfortunately. I just feel really let down by it, so I won't be carrying on with the series. I then read a really good sci-fi though, and that was The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. This is my first book by him and really, really enjoyed it. I do keep getting him confused with John Mars, and I feel like a few other Johns. I'm sorry, John Scalzi, but this was really good. So I picked this one up because it's basically about dinosaurs. So the main character in this one is working for what is essentially like Deliveroo or Uber Eats, or like a small startup version of that. He goes into what he thinks is his annual appraisal, and then he ends up getting fired, and so he has to become a delivery driver rather than working for like the head office. And then the company gets bought out by Uber Eats because of the competition. So all of that's going on, and then COVID hits. And don't worry, COVID doesn't really like have an impact on this story other than at the beginning, the main character really needs work. And obviously during COVID, everyone was under like going through furlough and being laid off and stuff. Everyone was basically in chaos. And so his college friend actually approaches him and it's like, I've got a really good job for you. Would you like to come to an island and do a thing and work with some big animals? So he's like, yeah, I can do that. And the benefits are really good. It's a really good, well-paying job. And he gets to, I think, Greenland, and then he goes through a time machine and he finds some kaiju, which are being preserved by this society. This is a really good book. It was really fast paced. It wasn't taking itself too seriously, and I really enjoyed the like sort of animal rights side of things. That's kind of what the author was really focusing on here. The sarcasm and humour in this book was really good as well. So I'm really impressed by this one. I gave this one 4 stars. I probably wouldn't ever reread it, but I would carry on reading work by John Scalzi because I feel like his humour really works for me. I then finished off The Mimicking of Known Successes as an audiobook, and this is something that I've been trying to read for the longest time. I got it as an ebook initially, and then I saw that it was on Audible Plus or whatever it's called. So I essentially had like a free copy. It was good. I gave it 3 stars. It's basically a detective story set on Jupiter, and it's also queer, and I can't really tell you the plot. I've honestly forgotten what it is. Someone went missing or something, and there were lots of trains and a university. I probably won't bother reading the second one because I just wasn't really captured by the characters. I think if you love the characters in this one, it's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes Watson situation dynamic. You'll really enjoy the book, but for me it was just okay, so I'm not going to pick up the second book, and I'll probably forget about this one soon. I also listened to Rolling in the Deep by Myra Grant, which is the prequel to Into the Drowning Deep, which I loved. I gave this one 4 stars. It's only a short story, and it's basically covering an event that you know that happens in Into the Drowning Deep. Some people go to the Mariana Trench and they find some killer mermaids, and that's all I really need to tell you. I think it's really well written. I loved the audiobook as well. It's very well told. It makes me want to reread Into the Drowning Deep, which I can definitely do soon. I would love to do that. Yeah, I had a good time with this one. It was good. I think I've actually read 11 books because I've got 2 more here that I haven't told you about. I didn't realise. Okay, so the second to last book that I think I read in March, or maybe I read this other one in April. No, I couldn't have done. Anyway, the second to last book that I read in March was Parasite. As you can see, I was kind of on a sci-fi kick in March. I read so many sci-fi books, particularly sci-fi horror. This one, like I said, is sci-fi horror, space horror, and it's basically a bunch of, not short stories, but the first couple, I would say, are short stories, and then the others are a little bit longer. They're all interlinked. So what happens is, in the first one, there are some scientists on a planet, and they are kind of in charge of like clearing the planet after after like solar flares and stuff, so they need to clear it of life forms that shouldn't be there, and they discover a life form that should not be there, and it gets really, really creepy. And then this life form starts inhabiting the scientists' bodies and then taking over the galaxy, it seems. It kind of starts like skipping from outpost to outpost, and you kind of get this like looming dread because the alien life form is kind of getting closer and closer to the main like central hub, I suppose. And then in the last story, a bunch of soldiers are going out to fight it once and for all, and it's kind of like life or death of the universe though, not just of like one person. So I really, really enjoyed this one. I love the way that it was told. Like I said before, I don't normally like short stories, but I do think this one worked out really, really well, because you kind of get the short stories in the beginning initially, like, so it's like snippets of the parasite, I suppose, taking over the humans' bodies and the different ways that it can take over, and you start to learn a little bit more about it as the stories go on. And then by the time you get to the end, you're kind of like the same sort of expert as the human characters in the book are, and you know as much as they do. You know how difficult this thing is going to be to kill and stop and destroy. So like I said, it's just like looming dread, and by the end I felt like all hope was lost. It was honestly such a dark book, but it was so, so good, and I can't wait to read more by Darcy Coates. I've read one horror book by her, which is like a haunted house horror. I think she's done one that's a deep sea horror, and I really want to read that one. I really want to read more space horror in general though. I feel like it might be my favourite genre. So if you've got any recommendations for me, tell me. It's space, caves, and the deep sea, which really creep me out. I don't really love many horror books set in the real world, because I just don't care about like ghosts and stuff, but anything like this, absolutely love it. So I would highly recommend this. I gave this one 4 stars, I think, but maybe I should bump it up to 4.5 because it was really, really good, and can't wait to pick up more from this author. The last book that I definitely read in March was a non-fiction book, and that was Trail of the Lost. So this one is written by a former park ranger who used to help out finding missing people in the park. So they could have been alive, or she could be basically just going out to find their bodies. And this book is basically focusing on 3 missing hikers who she was involved with, as in like she was kind of tasked or wanted to be involved in the searches for them. It's about them and how they ended up in the situation they were in on the Pacific Trail, and ideas about what could possibly be happening. But it's also not only about that, it's also about like the dangers of the trail, and it's bringing awareness to what could happen to people out there and how careful you have to be. Even if you're an experienced hiker, you still could mess up and things could go wrong, because it's such a dangerous thing to do. Like multi-day hikes are so, so dangerous. You've got kind of like the humans out there who could be doing something awful to you, serial killers, people who want to abduct you, meth dens, I think, are along this trail as well, meth farms. But then you've also got like mountain lions and stuff, and then you've just got like nature, as in like forest fires, snow, ice, all of this. So, so dangerous. And I think she did a really good job of kind of drilling that into the reader, and it's kind of like humans aren't meant to be alone out there, and it's so, so dangerous. So I think that she did a really good job of bringing awareness to all of this, and also to these 3 missing hikers as well. The hikers' families for the most part were involved in this book, and also with the author's searches as well. She worked directly with the families. I think she did a really good job of telling their stories, and also just telling the story in general. It was a really well written book. There's also a bibliography in the back, which I'm going to check out because I really like survival stuff, in case you couldn't tell. So I think this would be a really good one to read for that. It has made me want to visit the Pacific Crest Trail, but not do more than a day hike because it's just too dangerous. I'm not made for camping, for one thing. I really like this sentence from the end of the book. It kind of sums up the vibe of the story, I suppose. It says, "Whatever fate befell those men, when they saw an opportunity to escape the incessant buzz of civilization and immerse themselves in the magic and splendor of the natural world, they took it. I too have responded to the call of the wild, and I hope they are able to experience the same joy I did as they embarked on their own respective journeys. Most of all, I take heart in knowing that this same call, the one that drummed so fiercely within the hearts of Chris Sylvia, Chris Fowler, and David O'Sullivan, lives on, especially every spring, when a new batch of hopefuls set out to walk the long path of the Pacific Crest Trail, plunging, climbing, and twisting its way through the mountains." I just thought that was quite stunning, and I feel like it encapsulates what this book is about. So I really enjoyed this and I would highly recommend it. I'm going to buy myself a copy because this is a library book, if you couldn't tell by the shine. So I'm going to get my hands on a copy of this one sometime soon. And that's my entire wrap up. That was, I think, 11 books, and like I said, it was a really good reading month. I honestly had such a good time, and I hope April is going to be just as good. I'm already having a pretty great April. If you've seen my TBR, it's very ambitious, and I don't think I've read anything from my TBR so far, but the mood reading is really working out for me, so I'm really glad that I'm doing that. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite book of March was. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you on the next one. Bye.